Author Donna Jodhan presents Episode 10, Santa's Secret Suit. Miko Glitzky was a happy little boy. With two older brothers and parents for family, he was bright and always had an engaging smile and a twinkle in his baby blue eyes. He was shy, but always seemed to get himself in the middle of trouble. For a brief time, he had turned to petty crime, and his parents had begun to worry about what would become of him. But it would all change one night when Miko had a dream. The dream became the turning point in his life, and what a turning point it was. At the end, everything worked out. Santa's Secret Suit, a tale of fiction of a young man finding his purpose. Written by Donna J. Jodhan.
Hello, 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 it's Detective DJ and a very Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy holidays, happy everything. Compliments of the season to you all. And a very huge ho 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 from me and my team. Today it is time for episode 10. And this one is called Santa's Secret Suit. This is episode 10 in my special Christmas series of the box set entitled The 12 Days of Christmas. I have already recorded for you 9 episodes, and I hope that in the midst of all of the jolly making and the joy and the cheer, you have had some time to at least listen to one of my previous episodes. I know that everyone is busy cooking and shopping and baking and gift wrapping and partying and all of the balloons and the noisemakers and all of the activities in the malls and visiting the Santa. And I'm sure that you've not forgotten to write your letter or email your letter to Santa Claus. I hope not, because he's waiting to see who has been naughty and who has been nice. So before I start with episode 10 entitled Santa's Secret Suit, I'd just like to recap the other 9 for you by giving you their names. The first was entitled Santa's Super Secret. The second was entitled The President's Super Christmas Plane. The third was called Santa's Secret Toy Shop. The fourth was called Santa's Secret Christmas Ring. Number 5 was called Santa's Super Christmas Party. Number 6 was called Santa's Secret Sleigh Ride. Number 7 was called The President's Super Christmas Ship. Number 8 was called Santa's Christmas Midnight Mission. And number 9 was called The President's Super Christmas Car. Now it is time for me to introduce to you Santa's Secret Suit. And I hope you enjoy it. So now jump aboard and let's enjoy. Miko Glitzky, the Little Boy. Miko Glitzky had always been a happy little boy. He had grown up in a happy family with 2 loving parents and 2 older brothers. Christmases were always wonderful ones, as Mr. and Mrs. Glitzky had made sure that their sons would have a great time during the holiday season. They went shopping for lots of clothes and toys. They visited the malls and attended lots and lots of functions and parties. They wrote letters to Santa Claus and asked for all kinds of things. They helped their parents to decorate the Christmas tree, and they attended Christmas Mass with their parents on Christmas Eve. In addition to all of these activities, Miko's parents always made sure that their sons made time to do other things. Things such as getting involved with helping out at the food banks, making visits to the sick kids' wards of hospitals, visiting lonely seniors at their homes, and helping them to do their Christmas chores, going with other kids to sing carols at homes of others, and helping their moms to do stuff at home. Miko's older brothers, Slade and Aidan, were for the most part well behaved. They did as they were told, were always quick to offer a helping hand, and on the whole, they were good students. The youngest son, Miko, however, was a bit of a different story. For whereas he was also a good student at school, and was generally a helpful little boy, there was another side to him that worried his parents at times. Miko's parents would readily describe their youngest son as a little boy who loved to get into the middle of whatever was going on, and this often brought him headlong into trouble. Miko would almost always apologize to his parents for getting into trouble and for causing concern. But as soon as their backs were turned, he would be planning and plotting his next adventure. At first, the Glitzkys had felt that it was just the adventures of an imaginative little boy, and Miko's brothers had felt the same. Slade and Aidan Glitzky were 8 and 6 years older than their brother Miko, so on the whole, they had never really been playmates to their younger brother, and they had both felt badly about this, but it could not be helped. Mr. and Mrs. Glitzky had often asked their 2 older boys to keep an eye on little Miko. But truth be told, Miko had always found a way to elude their attention, and before you knew it, he was in the midst of some crazy adventure, and then it was time to go and bail him out. Miko was always smiling, and his big blue eyes were always twinkling. There was always something going on in that head of golden curls of his, and his teachers were always forgiving him for his little pranks at school. They loved the somewhat shy little boy who was always apologizing. He loved to laugh, and at Christmas time he would entertain his family with various versions of Santa Claus's Ho, Ho, Ho. At Christmas time he would often dress up as Santa Claus, which was a mini version of the big man, and then he would go out and entertain his friends. He would be all dressed up in a big, bright red suit, a long white beard, and a Santa's hat, all made for him by his mom. Miko also loved to play the piano, read mystery books, and build model planes and boats. All typical things for a little boy. But then there were the nights when he would sneak out and, as he would later admit, go on his special little adventures. Then he would return to his home in time for curfew, always making sure not to break it, and sneak back into his room as if nothing had ever happened. Miko never told anyone about his pranks and adventures. He kept everything to himself, and after one of his outings, he would lie in bed just simply grinning to himself that once again he had managed to pull something off. And if anyone had ever told his parents that they had seen Miko at the scene of the crime, so to speak, Miko vehemently denied, and at the end of the day, there was never really enough proof to pin the prank on Miko. But somehow his parents would eventually find out. But by that time it was too late, as the crime had already been committed. Nothing would last forever, however, and in his mind Miko knew this only too well. But as long as he stayed undetected, he would continue on with his adventures, as he called them. Besides, they made his little world more exciting and less boring. Yes, he loved his parents and older brothers dearly, but he often found them boring and stuffy, and he often referred to them in his mind as too good to be true. It was funny, but at each Christmas, Miko would dutifully write his letters to Santa Claus, and in them he would almost always ask for the same thing: a secret Santa suit. But he never told anyone why he was asking for this. And each time his parents read his letters, they would always shake their heads in puzzlement. And they would almost always say to each other, "That's just Miko." One time they did ask him why was it that he would always ask for a secret Santa suit. But Miko had not really given a response, choosing instead to just smile at them and wink his baby blue eyes. And the question was left hanging with no real response from the little boy. Miko's petty little pranks. There was a time that when he was just 4 years old, when he had ruined one of his mom's tea parties at Christmas time, when he had snuck in and had replaced the sugar in the sugar bowls with salt. But no one had ever suspected that it was him, and his mom had blamed herself for having made the mistake. Then there was a time when at age 6, he had managed to pull the fire alarm as the school was on lunch break, and everyone had to stand outside in the shivering cold, while the firemen made sure that there was no real fire. And no one had suspected the shy little boy with the engaging smile. Then, at age 7, he had somehow managed to pour glue all over the piano keys just before the Christmas concert. And the students had to end up singing without a piano accompaniment. Miko had never been caught for this prank, and had practically laughed himself to sleep that night. Of course, there were other little pranks along the way that Miko had played on his teachers. And one of these was the day that he had stuck gum on his teacher's chair, and he had almost been caught. The teacher had suspected that it was him, and had taken her suspicions to his parents, and they in turn had questioned Miko at length, but he had denied it all. The pranks had gotten more serious as he had grown older, and now at age 9, something would happen. And on an early December evening, things would come to a head for Miko. A Christmas school play was supposed to have taken place on this evening, and the hall was already full with students, parents, and friends. The noise level was very high, and everyone who was supposed to have been involved in something or something special was busy doing what they were supposed to be doing. Several of the students were suiting up for their respective roles. They were putting on their costumes and makeup and making sure that they looked good. They were busy looking in mirrors and checking things off with their friends. Others were practicing their lines at the last minute, and teachers were making sure that their respective groups were ready for action. Little Miko Glitzky was among the hustle and bustle, but not really a part of any group or anything. There he was, standing off to one corner, with a smile on his face and a twinkle in his baby blue eyes. No one was really paying attention to him as he stood there, and every now and then he would wave to one of his classmates as they walked by. Miko had come to the concert with his brothers, who were now in the audience with their friends. A few minutes before the first item on the Christmas concert was supposed to start, little Miko Glitzky made his move, and unseen by anyone, he had walked straight to the room that was close to the stage, and he had been checking out this room for the past few days, and had listened and observed what the room had contained, and what could happen if he were to do certain things. Miko had thought to himself that it would be really cool if he were to do it. No Christmas concert, and everyone would be forced to go home if he were to pull this one off. What a laugh! And Miko had quickly entered the small room and had stood for a moment listening. And when he had heard the principal being introduced by the master of ceremonies, he made his big move. Miko's lock-up experience. Miko reached tentatively for the switch on the wall and had no difficulty reaching it. He was tall enough, and after a second's hesitation, he flipped the switch. There was a loud bang, and then all was dark. Then pandemonium had broken out, and Miko had used the confusion to make good his escape. While the principal was attempting to calm the crowd in the hall, and teachers were attempting to do the same with their students backstage, Miko had fumbled his way along the hallway, and soon he had become lost. then he had begun to panic, as he had found himself becoming totally disoriented. And then the lights had returned, and Miko had begun to panic even more. This was not supposed to have happened, but then Miko had started to run, and as he was running, he thought he heard footsteps running behind him. Then he had begun to run faster, and soon enough he had found himself in an unfamiliar part of the school. He was not sure where he was going, but then he found himself running towards a half-opened door with a sign on it that said "Cleaning Room," and it was written in big, bold letters. Without thinking, Miko had slipped into the room and had shut the door behind him. There, the frightened little boy had waited for some time, and when he felt that it was safe enough for him to come out, he reached for the doorknob and turned it. But alas, the door would not budge. The door was locked, and Miko had nowhere to go. Miko began to cry and to hammer on the door. He began to shout for help, but soon enough he realized that no one was hearing his cries for help. And then, to his total dismay, the lights had gone out, and now he was in total darkness. He could not see anything in front of him, let alone be able to see the time on his iPhone. He could not even operate his iPhone to be able to call anyone. It was just too dark to see anything. And even if he were able to operate his iPhone, it would not have helped, as he would not have been able to gain reception in the cramped little room. Miko began to cry even louder and harder. When the lights had gone out after Miko had flipped the switch earlier, one of the teachers had thought to enter the little room near the stage, and with the aid of a little flashlight had discovered that the switch had been flipped off, and they had flipped it back on. And then, when the lights had gone off again just now, it was because the Christmas concert had ended, and everyone had gone home except for little Miko Glitzky. Miko's older brothers, Slade and Aidan, had looked everywhere for their little brother, and some of their friends had helped in the search. But when after an hour or so they could not find their little brother, they had gone home to tell their parents. Throughout the night, the Glitzky family had canvassed the neighborhood in search of their little boy, and neighbors had done the same, everyone growing more concerned by the hour. Slade and Aidan Glitzky had begun to blame themselves for the disappearance of their little brother, but their parents had kept telling them that it was not their fault. The night was probably the longest one that Miko Glitzky had ever spent. The little boy had begun to feel cold as the temperature continued to drop in the small, cramped room. But lucky for him, he had discovered some smocks worn by the cleaning staff, and he had put them on, and this had helped to keep him warm. Miko had also grown very hungry, and in the silence of the room, he could hear his little tummy growling so very loudly. True it is that he was somewhat warm, but his feet were cold, and he continued to be scared, and he could not stop the tears from running down his cheeks. The morning had come, and soon Miko could hear voices in the hallway. He began to hammer on the door, and soon a startled cleaner had opened the door, and a sobbing Miko had collapsed into his arms. Miko's Christmas sadness. The aftermath of this adventure was that Miko had confessed everything to his parents, and in turn they had told everything to his principal and to his teachers. Miko was allowed to take an early Christmas break from school, but the agreement was that he would spend most of his time at home and would only be allowed to go out on supervised trips. Miko's principal and teachers had agreed not to tell the rest of the school about this incident because they were afraid that it could cause problems for the little boy. Miko was allowed to watch TV and play with his toys, but there was no shopping for him this year, and no letters to Santa Claus would be allowed. The little boy did not protest, choosing instead to remain quiet. His customary smile had now vanished, and the twinkle in his baby blue eyes had now been replaced with sadness. Miko's parents, however, did allow him to have the family's dog Lexus stay close to him during the day, and Miko had welcomed this. A few days before Christmas, Slade and Aidan Glitzky had taken pity on their little brother and had taken him out shopping, but alas, the little boy had changed. No matter what his older brothers did to try and cheer him up, his baby blue eyes would only grow larger and fill with tears and sadness. They took him to some of his favorite stores and even bought him some of his favorite toys, but it was no good. Miko's head remained bowed, and his face remained sad and was often hidden in his hands. Mr. and Mrs. Glitzky did their best to make him laugh, but he would only shake his head and turn away. And even when they offered to take him to a Santa Claus parade, which was one of his favorite Christmas activities, he politely declined and went off to his room, quietly shutting the door behind him. When his mom had asked him to help her decorate the tree, he had softly asked if he could be excused for this year, and she had not pushed him. And when his dad had asked him if he had wanted to go on a Christmas train ride around the city, he had also turned thumbs down on it. The Glitzky family had become troubled and sad, but they had understood. Miko's recent experience had scared him greatly, and now it would take time for him to recover. They were convinced that after this episode, Miko would probably never pull another prank. And the only thing to do now was to wait for him to come out of his sadness. There was one thing that Miko did agree to participate in, and this was going to Christmas Mass with his family. And on Christmas Eve he had sat quietly between his parents and had sang along softly with the choir. And after the Mass was over, Miko had gone with his family to visit the manger, and they had observed him staring longingly at the baby Jesus. And he had even been seen reaching out and touching gently the baby Jesus' face. Miko's Christmas Dream. Everyone had now gone to bed after returning home from Christmas Mass. And as Miko lay quietly under his covers, thinking about things and wishing that he had never carried out his terrible prank, he suddenly began to feel sleepy, and soon he was dreaming. At first, he was a bit confused, and he was not quite sure where he was. But then, he had found himself in the middle of a huge mall, and when he looked up, he saw a nice lady walking towards him. Soon she was standing in front of him, and then she was smiling down at him, and then she spoke to him. She asked him his name, and he told her. Then she asked him why he was so sad, and he told her the whole horrible story about the prank that he had carried out, how he had been locked in the cleaning supplies room, and how much worry he had caused to his parents and brothers, and now how very sorry he was for everything. The kind lady had listened intently, and when Miko had finished, he had begun to sob. And the kind lady had hugged him and had told him that there was someone that she had wanted him to meet. She told him not to worry, as she was a friend of his parents, and his parents would not mind if she had taken him to meet her husband. At first Miko had hesitated, but then he had seen his mom standing and watching him, talking to the lady. And when he had looked at her, questioning whether or not he should go with the lady, she had smiled at him, and then he had turned and had started to walk with the lady. The lady had taken Miko's hand in hers, and soon they were walking towards a huge store, and then they had entered. And as they had entered, Miko could see that the store was packed with all kinds of toys for little girls and little boys. Miko and the lady had walked past all of the toys and had continued on to the back of the store, and there she had opened a door. They entered, and Miko's breath was totally taken away when he saw it all. A man in a red suit had risen to greet them, and Miko knew at once who he was. The man had hugged Miko and then turned and reached for something behind him. Then he had a suit in his hands and was holding it out towards Miko and telling him to put it on. Then he had made some adjustments to the suit and had told Miko to follow him. The man took Miko's hand as they walked, and soon enough they were out in the freezing cold. And there it was, Santa's gigantic sleigh. And waiting for them was Rudolph and the other reindeer. They greeted Santa, and he introduced them to Miko. Then Santa had handed Miko over to Rudolph, and he had placed Miko in the passenger seat of the sleigh. Then Santa had clambered aboard, followed by the reindeer, and soon it was time for takeoff. Miko could not believe it, and as the sleigh rose smoothly and slowly, he began to smile and clap his hands with joy. The Christmas air was fresh and cool, and it smelt of pine and spice. Santa spoke as he drove his sleigh, telling Miko where they were going to be going on this night. And soon everyone aboard was drinking hot chocolate and eating all kinds of Christmas goodies. And Mrs. Claus had started to sing Christmas carols. And soon everyone, including Miko, was joining in. They traveled over cities with bright lights. They traveled across the seas, and Miko could see large ships way down below, and their decks were crowded with sailors waving to them. They flew past planes of all sizes, and most of them waggled their wings in salute to Santa and his sleigh. They flew over forests, and birds and beasts alike greeted the sleigh as it sped by. Then they were dropping presents down chimneys and through open windows of houses, and Miko marveled at how this was being done. Santa showed Miko how to drop the presents down the chimneys and through the open windows, and he even allowed Miko to help him drive the sleigh. Then he and Miko had waved at the moon and the stars as they traveled along, and Miko had suddenly forgotten all about his troubles. Soon Miko was joining in the games with the reindeer as the sleigh flew, and then he had found himself playing air hockey and air skating with the reindeer. And they were doing this in mid-air, their feet just mere inches above the sleigh as it flew. Miko was having the time of his life, and Rudolph began to teach Miko how to do somersaults in mid-air, and the other reindeer were teaching him how to do other types of acrobats. And Santa and Mrs. Claus looked on with huge smiles on their faces as Miko and the reindeer continued to play and frolic. Miko was happy. He was laughing, smiling, and singing. He was waving at everything in sight and hugging each reindeer. But he had extra special hugs for Rudolph. Then Santa had taken the sleigh down to mere inches above a very calm ocean, and soon Miko and the other reindeer were water skiing and walking on the surface of the calm sea. Miko loved it all, and Santa and Mrs. Claus were so pleased that he was so happy. Then way beyond Miko's belief, Miko and the reindeer were racing each other on motorbikes along the beautiful sandy beach. And then they were skating on open ice with Christmas lights flickering in the background. Then they were up and away again, cruising just over the treetops. And Santa had told Rudolph to take Miko ziplining, and the other reindeer had gone along with them. Then they were swinging off the branches among the trees. and chasing each other over the treetops. Then Santa had allowed Miko and Rudolph to walk across the top of a high mountain and slide down its side. Miko could not believe what a terrific time he was having. He had suddenly figured out something very delightful. His suit was enabling him to do all of this, as his special suit contained special features to help him do such things as fly, play in midair, walk across mountains and slide down their sides, walk on water, and swing among tree branches. But everything had to come to an end, and this dream would be no different. Miko returns. And then it was morning, and Miko was waking up. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and stretched, and then he remembered where he was. And he also remembered that it was Christmas morning. And then Miko suddenly began to smell all kinds of different things. Pine, spice, the scent of new things around him, and yes, to the smell of his favorite breakfast being cooked downstairs in the family's kitchen. And then he had dared to open his eyes, and there it was. Miko had blinked twice before bolting out of bed and letting out a loud whoop. For there, hanging on a rack close to his bed, was a beautiful Santa suit with all of the additional paraphernalia: hat, beard, glasses, socks, shoes, and special gadgets to go along. And there was a huge card attached to it that read, "Merry Christmas, Miko. Enjoy." And it was signed from Santa and Mrs. Claus. And a string of X's and O's lay at the bottom of the card. And it looked exactly like the one in his dream. But Miko knew who had brought it. And he had begun to cry with joy. But there was more. As Miko started for the door, he saw other things out of the corner of his eye, and he could not believe what he was seeing. There were ice skates and an air hockey game. There were water skis and books, and puzzles and other things. There was even a shiny new bicycle, and yes, digital camera, and clothes. Miko could not believe what he was seeing, and before he could open the door and race downstairs, his parents and brothers had opened it, and Miko had rushed into their arms. Everyone was hugging each other, and now it was time to celebrate a happy Christmas morning. Miko Glitzky had returned. This is the end of episode 10, entitled Miko, All About Miko. The title, Santa's Secret Suit. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed bringing it to you. And I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of my team to wish each and every one of you a very, very Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, happy everything, joy on the well, Feliz Navidad, Buen Natale. All the best for the coming new year. And I'll be back with another episode very shortly. You take care now, and we'll see you very soon. Ho, ho, ho.